So this is a megafire because it has an outsized impact on the land and the people. This is the deadliest megafire that we've had in the United States in over 100 years. So not only was there destruction of commercial property in the downtown and the homes, but also tremendous loss of life. And that's something that really does complicate the recovery as it should. And so we're actually very surprised at the rate of which everyone has leaned in from federal, state, and local to clean up from this megafire, address the infrastructure issues, and actually be the first one that has rebuilding happening at the same time as debris removal. A megafire has an outsized impact because it burns really hot and it actually destroys the infrastructure under the ground. It's not a house fire, it's not an orderly wildfire, it's like a Godzilla that actually tromps through a place and just does utter destruction. It's often very hard for people to make sense of it in their minds when they are looking at the destruction after that. So why would some houses be left and others? And that's because there's so much fuel and the ember cast moves way ahead. So megafires are just much hotter and faster and deadlier than other fires. So I caution people to look at any fire, but in particular this one, and try to layer other fires over it exactly. There are some things that we know what to expect in the timeline, but there are other things like the fact that this is the most remote place on Earth, and it's an island that has incredibly high land values and relatively low incomes with respect to what people have to rebuild. We believe that there is a huge opportunity here for public, private, nonprofit sectors to come together to actually bridge the gap between what people have to rebuild and what they're going to need to rebuild. We also know that they are thinking about climate resilient housing that's equitable and culturally relevant. It really does matter that this is a place with a legacy of colonialism, but also a really rich cultural history that we believe provides a perfect underpinning for the rules of disaster. In fact, the first time I came here, when I went home, when my husband picked me up, I said to him, "Oh, I found the place that has all of the words for the things that I care about most in disaster." But mostly what I want people to know is we expect this rebuild to be pretty fast, not slow. And so we're hoping that there is, and we know it's already coming in place, but a very clear planning process that goes towards the vision of rebuilding the way that the people of Lahaina want. People come to visit Maui and Lahaina and they love it, but what they have to remember is that this is a small town first, and the people who live here, they deserve the biggest voice, but also all of our care. Another thing to think of is that this is also a world stage for recovery and resiliency, for what can be climate resilient. They can rebuild in a way that is their building stock for the next 100 years. But it can be safer, it can be more equitable, and everyone will see it. So I caution people from the mainland, if they come here and they want to participate in the rebuild, that they keep all of the values of the people of Maui in mind first, and that they contribute to something that will also show the rest of the world what's possible after a megafire. And I'm the CEO of an organization. It's a nonprofit called After the Fire USA. We were founded in the midst of the October 2017 megafires that affected the North Bay of San Francisco, where we lost 8,900 structures. We were the first megafire out the gate. And even though, we were fortunate to have the help of FEMA and Cal OES and all these people who came forth, nobody knew really how to do a megafire. They didn't know about infrastructure. I love when I see and I look over, don't remove the walls. We didn't know to do that. If people would come back and all their walls would be gone, not from ill intent, but just from not knowing. What's really important in a megafire like this one and every single one is visual deliverables of progress and hope. And that's what you're providing for your community. It may seem like it may be just for you, but it actually, when everyone drives by, they're going to feel a little bit better about what's happening. And the more that this happens, then it builds momentum. This is the most complicated fire I have ever seen, and I've worked in 18 of them in the past almost 7 years. I travel the nation talking about megafire. I try to help FEMA and the other agencies to work with them to figure out rule changes or what works in wind and rain, but doesn't work in megafire. Selfishly, when this fire happened, it was horrifying, but I was very glad that you came at the end of the learning cycle of the last 7 years and that you had really the best FEMA administrator in Bob Fenton that you could have ever asked for, because he already knew he's ours too. I've worked across California, Oregon, Colorado, I'm consulting in Texas, and to be here in Maui, to be allowed into this particularly painful fire has been an honor. You know, I know that people think that it's a trauma response to be like, why isn't this faster? Why aren't we like rebuilt? And in a year, people will say to you, why isn't it rebuilt? And that's just an unrealistic expectation. You are moving really quickly here in Maui. You're doing the right thing. You're doing it in the most remote place on the planet too, with legacy of colonialism, with the holiest place in all of Hawaii being in the burn scar. I've never seen the federal government sort of bend to the will of a community like I have for yours. And I know, and I love that, because it's going to help every community that comes after yours, because despite being very oversubscribed with an unprecedented number of climate disasters, they still showed up for you and actually listened to the community. It's why they didn't send you disposable housing. It's why you had to invent new things, which we all have to do in megafire communities. And we do that for each other, and we do that with each other. So I feel honored to stand here with you, and I feel honored to be allowed into this conversation. The era of megafire is only 7 years old. So we're going to get through this together, but it has been, you know, a painful thing to watch this community endure such a terrible disaster, but very inspiring too, to see how you're actually bouncing through it, coming through it together, working through the really hard, really logistically difficult problems together. And I hope that you do feel a sense of pride, and also, and thank you for allowing us on your land too.
Can you speak to how the higher property values on Maui will impact the speed at which the rebuild will take place?
I can. So one of the things that happens with megafire in particular, because it's so new, is people want to layer one fire on top of the other. And even though I am a megafire expert, I always know walking into a community that I need to know all the demographics, I need to know the land values, all of those things. The higher the land value, the faster the rebuild. It's just a matter of numbers, of the interest, unfortunately, developers, which you've been very good at sort of warding off the worst of that. But there's always going to be a pressure to rebuild because of the extraordinarily high land values here and relatively low incomes. We've never seen that before, but we still know that you will be rebuilt between year 5 and year 6, probably at the most between year 6 and year 7, but primarily 90–95% rebuilt by then. There are other communities with very low land values, especially if it's a community that had, like Paradise, low land values and a much older population, and they choose not to rebuild most of the time. And so in this case, Maui is very special in that way, but it means it also requires special care. I want to caution people when they're always pushing for faster. Faster is good because you do need those visual deliverables, but faster should also always hold the values of the community at the center of it first. And the people outside of Maui and Lahaina need to remember this is a small town for people that they visit. And to be patient and respectful, especially if you're from the mainland and you come here and you want to participate in the rebuild, you have to let the community lead and not try to supplant or supersede them. If it turns over, it could also turn over to other family members who were previous renters. It's one of the statistical difficulties here is that when you hear 50% renters, the question that I ask is like, well, did they rent from a family member? Because multi-generational family home ownership was normal here and can be replicated. If we can, and we will do everything we can to support the county, for the next 5 years for sure. But there are ways to actually supplement the cost of rebuilding through public-private nonprofit partnerships. And we're going to, give some of that information out to the county that can actually bring the cost of rebuilding down. The 30% turnover is about people who are underinsured, uninsured. Everyone's underinsured in every single megafire. That always happens. And then people who, it depends on their age, so it depends on certain things. But in this case, you can actually get the vast majority of people home. Community cohesion is actually the number one tell whether or not a community does rebuild. And with the 30% turnover, I would use that as to inform how to actually build equity and climate resiliency in the center of your rebuild. Maui is on the world stage for climate resiliency and how to rebuild back in a way so you don't burn down the same way. There are ways to do that. It's going to be hard. None of it is simple, but if that can be planned for at the beginning with a vision and by really leveraging the care of the people who want to help this place rebuild, you can reduce that number dramatically, or you can make sure it's passing to family members, because the #1 goal is to get everybody home who lost their home, not new people.